Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for this 7th episode of the Sarasota Bay Deep Dive Series, where we interview people whose work has positive impacts on Sarasota Bay. My name is Darcy Young. I work for the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program here in Sarasota, Florida, where our mission is to restore and protect estuaries from Anna Maria Sound down to the Venice Inlet. And my guest for this 7th Deep Dive episode is Dr. Abbey Tyrna. Hi, Abbey.
Hi.
Abbey is the Water Resources Extension Agent for University of Florida IFAS Extension in Sarasota County. Abbey received a PhD from Penn State University, where she studied human influences on wetland hydrology. And during this deep dive episode, Abbey is going to teach us all about wetlands in Florida. So thanks for joining us, Abbey.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got interested in wetlands, and how you came to work as an extension agent for University of Florida?
Sure, yeah. So I grew up in Southwest Florida in Cape Coral, Florida, if anybody's familiar. Cape Coral used to actually be like an entire mangrove / floodplain wetland from the Caloosahatchee River. And then it was drained and dredged and created like so many canals. I think they have more canals than the city of Venice, Italy. So lots of canals and lots of man-made lakes. And when I was growing up, we had a water supply problem. So even though water was everywhere, we literally didn't have enough to drink. So we were like one of the first people to have a reverse osmosis plant where they actually took salt water and used it for drinking. I'm not sure if reverse osmosis plant is the right lingo to use, but we were one of the first communities to put it in. And so I went on a field trip and learned about it when I was in elementary school, and it just changed like my perspective of life of how can there be water everywhere and we don't have enough to drink. So I just wanted to learn more, and that really is what brought me to study wetlands. Not only about the water issue, but I also went on a field trip in 7th grade to Cypress, the 6 Mile Cypress Preserve. If anyone's gone there, awesome. If you haven't gone there, put it on your list of places that you must go. That also changed my life. Just walking through that cypress swamp was it. I wanted to study wetlands, and I went on to study wetlands at LSU and then at Penn State. And when I came back, I thought, you know what? I'm going to use all my wetland knowledge back in Florida, where I grew up and where I love to learn about wetlands and what sparked my interest in the first place. But unfortunately, there's lots of stormwater ponds now in their place. So So just trying to apply my love for knowledge, I stepped into the extension world to educate and do some research about wetlands, but it really just turned into, I do a lot of work on stormwater ponds.
You do, and it's really important. I'm always calling you with questions. So, as you just described, one of your roles at the Extension Office is to raise awareness of wetlands, and now, what has replaced wetlands in a lot of Sarasota County. But I'm wondering what types of natural wetlands do we have in Sarasota County specifically, and kind of what counts as a wetland? I know you have a few slides to show us. So I'm going to go ahead and share your screen here.
Awesome. So here is just one of our quintessential wetlands. This is a depression marsh. And why this area is considered a wetland is because, so there's lots of definitions of wetlands, actually. There's a legal definition. But generally speaking, we can think of a wetland as a transition area. So it's largely an area between what we consider a permanent body of water and the dry uplands. So that's one definition. But this depression marsh is actually not too much of a transition area. It's actually an area that holds water for long enough that the soils have changed and the plants have changed. So you can find plants that can only live, they're obligate plants, and they're obligated to live in wet areas. And so that's how we know that this area is a wetland. So basically, it's an area of land that holds water long enough to have hydric soils and hydrophilic plants. Those are water-loving plants. So depression marshes are the #1 wetland across this peninsular Florida. So it's the most common wetland. And let me just show you how common it used to be. So these are depression marshes pre-Sarasota County development. You can see little Sarasota Bay there in the left lower corner. And so these are depression marshes. And so that picture that you just saw would have been across this landscape. All those black areas that you see are those depression marshes. Another way to look at all the wetlands of Sarasota County is to look at wetland soils map. So this is a actual picture of, you can see the large green area going through Sarasota County with blue dots. That would be called a basin marsh, because that marsh is actually so large that it would be considered a basin. But then all the green splattered throughout, those are hydric soils. So those are those water-loving soils that can only exist when water stands at the surface or underneath the surface and saturates the soils long enough to create those hydric soils. But there's so many other types of wetlands. I'm really just scratching the surface here. There's also swamps. So marshes are generally wetlands with less than 10% woody vegetation, and any wetlands with more than that are considered swamps. So woody vegetation, really think trees and shrubs. So what you can see here, it's a potash marsh, a potash swamp, a mangrove swamp, and a cypress swamp. And that's really all I have as far as the different types of wetlands in Sarasota County. But like I said, I am just scratching the surface. If you ever look at a map of Myakka State Park, you could see all kinds of different types of wetlands that go through Myakka State Park.
Awesome. So we have all these different kinds of wetlands, and I'm wondering, do they have similar characteristics in terms of what they do for ecosystem services, what they do for us, and why they're all important?
Yeah. So back in the 1980s, wetland scientists made this analogy that wetlands are like the kidneys of the landscape. And so as the kidneys of the landscape, they perform a lot of important functions, but probably one of the most important functions is that it filters pollutants. So just like your kidneys of your body filter out all the bad stuff, and it's important to have good working kidneys, just similar to that, the landscape has its filtration system through wetlands. But more than that, they provide water for drinking. So they are a lot of times the windows into the aquifer. So they, like the green swamp in Central Florida is one of the earliest known connectors to our Florida aquifer, where water that moves through that green swamp recharges the Florida aquifer. But they also provide flood protection. Coastal swamps, such as mangrove swamps, provide so much protection from hurricanes and wave attenuation. They also, those same swamps also provide huge benefits as far as nursery grounds for fish. So there's a plethora of services that wetlands provide for humans, but then there's just their mere existence for wildlife. They're very important sanctuaries for birds. Florida has lost 80% of its wading birds, and that's because we've lost the wetlands or the hydrologic function of these wetlands, meaning that we're in the dry season and we're at the tail end of our dry season, and then we have a wet season, and birds knew to come during the dry season when their food would be concentrated in puddles, basically in marshes and swamps, so that they could easily eat, and then they could also nest. But because we changed the hydrology, we also messed up bird patterns and bird survivability, basically. So again, I feel like we could talk about wetland functions and values, just like we could talk about the various types of wetlands probably for hours. So I'm just scratching the surface, but those are just some of the benefits that wetlands provide to us. And then there's just the benefit of cultural and aesthetics and habitat as well.
Right. Yeah, I always hear this statistic that more people come to Sarasota County to go birding than to go golfing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah,
can't go birding without our wetlands. So
exactly. So do you have numbers on, what's the status of wetlands in Florida and specifically here in the Southwest Florida region?
Yeah, so wetlands used to occupy, basically, it was about 4 New Jersey-sized states. I mean, I could give you the number, but I'm not really sure it matters. So if you think about 4 states in New Jersey, that's how much
in Florida.
In Florida, yeah, that's how much wetland area we had, and we've lost just about, a little more than half of that. So now we just have about 2 New Jersey-sized states left, and honestly, it's really dependent on how you count. So there's every 10 years there's a report that comes out that talks about wetland trends and losses by the Federal Wildlife. What is it? Now I get confused.
National Wetlands Inventory, I think. Right?
No, it's Ralph Tyner's work, and it comes out every 10 years, and I can't think of the agency because it's the Federal Wildlife or Federal Fisheries one. So sorry about that. But anyway, it depends on how you count, because a lot of times they count ponds as not a wetland removal, but they count ponds as wetland gain. And we are gaining stormwater ponds like nobody's business. So we have currently 6,600, and we're counting. There's 76,000 across the state of Florida. So we're growing in ponds, but we are reducing our marshes. We are reducing our basin marshes. Our swamps are one of the primary wetlands to be destroyed right away. And then also those swamps in the floodplain of rivers are also imperiled. So we had 4 states of New Jersey, and now we have 2, but we're continuing to lose those, and we're gaining ponds in their place.
Gotcha. So my next question for you was, how do today's wetlands compare to pre-development wetlands of 100 to 150 years ago? And maybe one way of thinking about that is, how do the functions of a natural wetland compare to the functions of a stormwater pond, which is what we've installed to kind of try to replace some of those functions of a natural wetland, right?
Yeah, so obviously the functions of an open water system are going to be different than the functions of a system that hosts a large variety of trees and plants. So right there, you could see that there's huge differences. Wetlands are they're so diverse. So an individual system will have variable depths of water. So you might have no water at the surface standing, but water right in the soils. And then you could walk like 2 steps, and then you have water just above the ground. And then you walk 2 more steps, and then you have water up to your knees. And so when you have all that variability in water depth, then you have all these different functions that occur because of that variability. Stormwater ponds are not variable. So usually there's a 4-to-1 slope, and then you get right to your deep part, and that's it. So you don't host all those different changes of life due to the variable changes of depth to water, and just chemical changes too, the biogeochemical changes that occur at those variable depths of where water stands. Just provides for so much, it just a variety of different cycling of contaminants and stuff that you just don't get really out of a stormwater pond, because there's really just kind of 2 to 3 different depth zones. But we could do more with stormwater ponds, which is what my goal is to get more functionality out of these systems. And one way to do that is to plant different wetland plants within the stormwater pond itself. So my goal is to get these stormwater ponds to function better and to have lower maintenance involved with them, so that they can function more like a natural wetland. So there's a lot of differences between man-made wetlands and natural occurring wetlands. We have decades of research that shows that no matter how hard we try, we just can't create them the way nature intended. So we do our best, but they're not the same. Unfortunately, their functions will never be the same, because really you can't really get the hydrology right. that's basically what it boils down to, is getting that hydrology right, because the hydrology really is what is the backbone of any wetland and all the functions that they provide.
Yeah, so that's one of the challenges that we face with Florida's wetlands today, right? Just that they're literally being replaced, although probably at a lower rate than they were 50 years ago or so.
That's right. Yes. There are wetland protections in place that would enable someone who wants to develop on top of wetland to seek other options, or to protect the wetland in place, or to mitigate for it someplace else. So yes, we are developing less of them than we used to. But so a lot of people probably live in neighborhoods where they have wetland preserves. Those preserves were part of the permit that they got to develop on top of some of the wetlands. Maybe they didn't develop right on top of a wetland, but they definitely caused harm to the wetland by their development. So through that harm, they also have to mitigate for that harm. So they have to preserve wetlands in place, and then also maybe enhance a wetland someplace else, or create a wetland someplace else in order to offset any of the impacts that were done in that development. The way we might calculate impacts might not be perfect. So the calculation scheme of what one-to-one impact to enhancement might not be perfect. So we know that we're losing functions overall, which is a problem. I think it's important as we think about emergency management, and we're in a crisis now, and it's not an environmental crisis, but thinking about how when the next major hazard happens, how can we beneficially use our landscape, especially all those wetlands that I showed at the beginning? How can we continue to use the ones that exist in order to benefit us, to protect us from the next major flood, the next major drought, the next hurricane, etc. So we are in a drought right now, and our wetlands are super important to providing us with water, recreation, etc.
Right. So what are some of the challenges that those wetlands are facing today? Beyond development, I'm thinking about invasive species, fragmentation, things like that.
Invasive species, fragmentation. So when I was in grad school, I did my work on how changes to hydrology, what does that change in a wetland? And the number one thing that changes to hydrology of a wetland creates is invasive species. So even just small changes to the hydrologic pattern of a wetland can create an opening for invaders. And invasive species, we spend billions of dollars in the state to eradicate invasive species, and most of them are in the aquatic systems, so in these wetland environments. And those preserves that we talked about earlier, they're experiencing death by 1,000 cuts. Think about all the roads that are going around them, and how they're connected to our stormwater ponds. So that hydrology is completely changed. And so when you change that hydrology while you're trying to preserve the plant life, it's so hard to manage because the hydrology is not the same as it was before the development. So I think that you name them all. There's lots of fragmentation. There are great groups out there. Maybe you know that one in particular that looks at corridors throughout the state, and they have put out lots of videos, and they actually go out and try to get from, I know they try to get from East Florida to West Florida using corridors. So they're trying to make more greater large-scale connectivity of these wetland systems to preserve biodiversity at every, even at the smallest scale, like soil biodiversity, to the largest scale, like panthers and black bears.
Yeah, that's the Florida Wildlife Corridor. It's been really interesting to watch their work for sure.
Yeah, everyone should check out those videos. They're really awesome because you get to see Florida in all of its glory.
Yeah. And yeah, just the idea of camping in Fakahatchee is it's something to see.
Yeah.
So Abby, there's like so much that we could talk about, but I'm wondering maybe we can just distill down to what communities can do in Sarasota to help support wetlands, both our natural ones, maybe these wetland preserves that they have in their communities, maybe just the stormwater ponds in their backyards. What are the things people can do?
Okay, so this is such a tough question because there's a lot of things people can do, but I think it kind of always boils down to perspective. So one thing that people can do is challenge their perception of Florida wildlife, like plants. Let's just start with plants. I'm going to start about animals, but let's just think about Florida plants. Like, I think a lot of people, I get calls all the time about weeds in their stormwater pond or the weakness of their wetland preserves. And so if you challenge your perception of like, why do you think these are weeds? And I challenge my perception all the time because I'll go to some place that my visitor will be like, this is the most gorgeous place. And I'll be like, oh, but that's invasive and that's invasive. So it is a truly gorgeous place. My perception of everything being invasive, harming my perception of it being beautiful is something that I need to challenge, just like people need to challenge whether or not those weeds, are they really ugly? And what is their function? And if you knew their function, would you think of them as more beautiful? So, for example, people think that the bulrushes in their stormwater ponds block their view and they want them cut down. But bulrushes are super important. They host snails, and those snails bring the limpkins and bring all the different wading birds that are eating snails. So if you want to see wading birds and you want to have bulrushes to host the snails, and the bulrushes are also protecting the banks from erosion. So one thing that people can do first and foremost is challenge their perception. Just think, what do I think about Florida plants? Do I really see the full glory? And then maybe you should turn to one of those videos we mentioned earlier, just so you can see what wild Florida looks like. The second thing they can do is just enhance the variety of wetland plants in their neighborhood. So most neighborhoods have a stormwater pond. Those stormwater ponds are meant to hold plants. I say that because we live in an area that is just high in phosphorus, and any area that has fresh water and high phosphorus means that we have lots of ability to grow plants. So that means that look at your stormwater pond. If it doesn't have plants, consider putting plants in. There's so many to choose from. There's over, I could give you a document that has over 100 different wetland plants that you could choose from to plant into your stormwater pond. Some of those you're not going to like, but I'm sure you're going to find a handful that you will like. So plant your stormwater ponds, consider your perceptions, and then last, look at your preserves. If you have preserves, a lot of them haven't been managed in years, even though you're supposed to get them inspected on a regular basis through the Southwest Florida SWIFMUD, Southwest Florida Water Management District. A lot of them have not been inspected. So, start a committee in your HOA to look at your natural assets. So everything from your stormwater ponds to your wetland preserves. And are there invasive species in there? Can you remove them? I think you probably know about Stony Brook. The Stony Brook community is one of the model communities. You can call Stony Brook in Sarasota and ask to have a tour of their wetland preserve so you could see the management work that they have done. They were always open to people coming in and looking at their wetland preserve. So they removed lots and lots of invasive species. And through just that removal, they had the natural resurgence of wetland plants that were there long ago before all those invasive species like Melaleuca came in and changed the system. So challenge your perceptions, look at your stormwater ponds, look at your wetland preserves. And then also the next thing you should do is just look at your yard. Do you have wet areas in your yard? A lot of people do. Like in between houses, there are these little swales. A lot of people try to fill them in because they don't like the standing water. But instead of filling them in, let's figure out ways to make the water move through the system more quickly so you don't have standing water. So maybe plant higher plants with deeper roots that will take up more water and transpire more water, leaving that area drier than normal, or drier so that you appreciate it more. So there's lots that can be done in your own yard as well. I have a downspout that creates so much water. I get a soggy place in my yard, so I just underneath my grass, I just put pebbles, and those pebbles help to infiltrate water more quickly. So I actually dug a little trench, put some pebbles in it. Now my downspout goes right there, and I get water going into the ground quicker, which is actually better for everyone. It's better for me. It's better for our superficial aquifer, and it's just a win-win. Next time, as soon as the wet season comes, and I know how wet it gets after my rework, I can figure out what kind of plants I can put in there other than grass. So I'm going to put some plants that can withstand wet and dry. So we can look to our own yards, we can look to our neighborhoods, and then we can look to our insides to challenge our perceptions of what we think Florida beauty really means.
Awesome. I love how comprehensive that was. And I'm going to throw in one more, if you don't mind, which is volunteering, because the estuary program has a fantastic volunteer group where we go out and help our partners restore wetlands throughout our watershed. So you can volunteer with us. The counties have their own volunteer programs as well. It's a great way to get out and see these wetlands in person and learn about them, and get ideas for what to bring back to your own community.
Yeah, that's awesome. Volunteerism is also a great way to give back. And you guys do so much with coastal wetlands. I didn't even really touch on coastal wetlands. It's not my expertise, but there's just so much to be done, because remember, we had 4 states in New Jersey, and now we only have 2, and we're trying to gain more so that we can build up that function, so we can have cleaner water, and we can have cleaner air, and just get Florida back into balance.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, all right, Abby, this has been awesome. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before I ask you your final question?
No, I don't think so.
Cool. So I'm wondering, I've been asking this question of all of our interviewees, but I've tweaked it a little bit for you today. So my question is, do you have a favorite wetland that you're looking forward to getting back to?
Oh, yes. I have so many favorite wetlands. So Minnesota Scrub Preserve, highly recommend everyone taking a trip out there. Minnesota Scrub Preserve has marsh, depression marshes that I showed a picture of at the beginning. You can see they have a whole buttonbush swamp. So we'd call it a swamp because buttonbush is woody debris, and it's more than 10% woody debris. So, I mean, not debris, woody vegetation. So more than 10% woody vegetation equals a swamp. So they have a buttonbush swamp, which is amazing in bloom. So I would definitely go to Minnesota Scrub. But then Sleeping Turtles Preserve in Sarasota County, Sleeping Turtles North, the floodplain wetlands are amazing. And I would start going there in a couple weeks when it starts raining. It's going to be amazing. You're going to see all kinds of swamp lilies and blue flag iris in bloom. It'll just be amazing. That's another wonderful place. And then, like I mentioned earlier, Myakka State Park, but not just Myakka State Park, like when you go in and you pay and you go to the visitor center, like go outside of there. There's so many trails down the road. If you go east on 72, there's so many places. You'll be in a dry prairie, and the next thing you'll know, you'll be in one of those depression marshes, but it'll be the most beautiful depression marsh you've ever seen, because it's the most intact, and no real harm has been done to the hydrology there. And then this is my last one. I know you said one, but there's so many. So also in Myakka State Park, the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the day, I don't know what year, but it was a long time ago, maybe 1950s, where they created cypress basins. So you can see 2 cypress domes when you're driving along Mayaca, and those cypress domes, you can actually visit one. If you're driving down the road, you'll see it on the right, and there's a little trail that goes right to it. So you can also see that cypress dome, which is just a lovely place to visit and just see all of the duck potato and cypress trees and all the life that's there.
That sounds fantastic. And I think we can probably throw up a link to a few of those spots so that y'all can find them later on.
Yeah. And also, you could tell that I'm partial to freshwater wetlands. So I didn't even name all the coastal places that you can go. So I'm sure, Darcy, you have a lot of coastal wetlands that might be your favorite. Maybe you could share those with the viewers too.
I do. Yeah, I think we're going to have to cover mangroves in a separate episode because they're too special. They deserve their own.
Totally.
But I really appreciate your expertise, especially on the freshwater stuff, Abby, and you're a great colleague. And, I think you have so much knowledge to share with people who are looking to not only improve their stormwater ponds, but just their overall interaction with water in Sarasota County. So thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Again. So thanks everybody for joining us here on this 7th episode of the Sarasota Bay Deep Dive Series. That was Dr. Abbey Tyrna, who is the Water Resources Agent for University of Florida IFAS Extension in Sarasota County. Abby has a lot of resources for what you can do as a citizen to work on your water usage and improve your nitrogen footprint, as we like to call it. So I think what I'll do is put her email address in the comments on this post, and you can reach out anytime. So in terms of moving forward, we're actually taking a break until next Thursday with our deep dive series. We'll be back next Thursday, May 14th, and we'll be interviewing another awesome local woman in science, Dr. Emily Hall, who is manager of the Ocean Acidification Program and the Chemical and Physical Ecology Program at Mote Marine Laboratory and Aquarium. So I hope to see you back here next Thursday, and thanks again for joining us.